He thought a locked door could decide who belonged. But that morning, the man standing in the hallway was the one person with the authority to change every lock in the building. At 6:42 a.m., Lieutenant Commander Marcus Ellison stepped out of the elevator on the third floor of the Westbridge Police Department, holding a paper cup of black coffee in one hand and a worn leather folder in the other. The squad room was 20 feet ahead, behind a frosted glass door with peeling gold letters that read Patrol Operations, and beyond it came the low murmur of voices, chair legs scraping tile, and the sharp little bursts of laughter that always sound harmless until you realize they are aimed at someone. Marcus was 39 years old, 6'1", calm-eyed, clean-shaven, dressed in a navy suit instead of a uniform because today was not supposed to be about spectacle. Today was supposed to be about transition. After 16 years in law enforcement, after internal affairs work, community policing reform, federal task force coordination, and 2 years helping rebuild trust in departments from Georgia to Maryland, he had been appointed the new commander of Westbridge Patrol Division. The announcement had been sent to senior staff late the night before, but the full roll call was scheduled for 7 o'clock. He had asked the chief for one thing: no grand entrance. He wanted to observe the culture before he addressed it, to hear how officers spoke when they thought leadership was not listening, to see whether respect lived in the room or only showed up when cameras did. So he arrived early, carrying no arrogance, no anger, no need to prove what his resume had already earned. He reached for the squad room handle. It did not move. From inside, someone laughed. Then a voice said, loud enough to be heard through the glass, "Try the visitor lobby, man. This room's for real officers." Marcus paused, his hand still on the handle. Not because he was shocked. That would have been too easy. Shock belongs to people who have never been mistaken for the help in buildings where they outrank half the room. Shock belongs to people who have never had their badge examined twice, their credentials questioned slowly, their name repeated like it could not possibly belong on the list. Marcus had lived long enough in America to know that some people do not need a reason to doubt a black man in a place of authority. Sometimes his presence alone is the reason. He looked through the narrow, clear strip in the glass and saw 3 officers near the center table, all in uniform, coffee cups in hand, their duty belts resting on chair backs. One of them, Officer Brent Callahan, leaned back with a grin that had practiced cruelty hiding under casual humor. Beside him stood Officer Tyler Reese, younger, uncertain, eyes flicking between the door and the floor. A third officer, Sergeant Alan Price, said nothing, which in rooms like that often meant more than words. Marcus knocked once, not hard, not dramatic. "Open the door, please." Callahan turned his head slowly, enjoying the audience. "Badge access only," he called out. "You must be lost." A few officers looked away. One woman near the back, Officer Dana Brooks, stopped writing and stared at the door as if she recognized the shape of a mistake before anyone else did. Marcus did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He simply slid his hand into his jacket pocket, pulled out his department-issued access card, and held it against the reader mounted beside the frame. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the light turned green. The lock clicked open with a clean, final sound that seemed to cut through every laugh in the room. Marcus pushed the door inward and stepped across the threshold. The air changed before anyone spoke. Callahan's grin collapsed. Reese straightened so quickly his chair bumped the table. Sergeant Price's face went pale around the edges. Marcus walked to the front of the room, placed his leather folder on the podium, and looked at the officers who had just taught him everything he needed to know before roll call even began. "Good morning," he said, his voice steady enough to make the silence feel heavier. "I'm Commander Marcus Ellison, and before we discuss assignments, we're going to discuss why a locked door became a test of character." For a moment, nobody breathed the way people normally breathe in a room built for command. The squad room, with its bulletin boards, duty charts, radio chargers, and half-empty coffee cups, suddenly felt smaller than it had seconds before. Marcus Ellison stood at the front without leaning on the podium, without folding his arms, without letting disappointment sharpen into anger. That was what unsettled them most. He did not look wounded. He looked aware. Officer Brent Callahan stared at the access card still in Marcus's hand, then at the gold command pin on his lapel, then back at the door as though the door itself had betrayed him. Officer Tyler Reese swallowed hard and lowered his eyes. Sergeant Alan Price shifted his weight from one foot to the other, A man trying to decide whether silence could still protect him after silence had already taken a side. Marcus let the room sit inside the consequence of its own behavior. He had learned years ago that some truths do not need volume. They only need space. At 7 o'clock, he said, I was scheduled to introduce myself as your new patrol commander. At 6:46, this room introduced itself to me first. No one answered. A radio crackled near the back wall, then went quiet again. Officer Dana Brooks slowly closed the notebook in front of her, her expression controlled but troubled. She had served 12 years in Westbridge, long enough to know which jokes were jokes and which ones were warnings dressed in laughter. Marcus looked across the room, not stopping on Callahan too long, not sparing anyone from being seen. I want to be clear about something. I did not come here looking for a mistake. I came here looking for a culture. A mistake is when someone forgets a code, misses an email, or misunderstands a schedule. A culture is what people do together when they believe nobody with authority is watching. That sentence landed harder than any accusation could have. Callahan's jaw tightened. Commander, I did not know who you were, he said, trying to sound professional, but the words came out thin. Marcus nodded once. I understand that. The room almost relaxed. Then Marcus continued. That is exactly why it matters. The quiet returned, deeper now. Respect is not something we reserve for people after we confirm they can affect our careers. It is not a password. It is not a reward for rank. It is the minimum standard for every person who walks into this building, whether they wear a badge, file a complaint, ask for directions, or come here on the worst day of their life. Tyler Reese looked up then, shame flickering across his face. He remembered the laugh he had not quite joined but had not stopped either. Sometimes cowardice does not make a sound. Sometimes it just stands close enough to cruelty to be counted with it. Marcus opened the leather folder and removed a single sheet of paper. Not a disciplinary form. Not yet. A printed copy of the department values posted on the city website. Service, integrity, accountability, community trust. He held it up where everyone could see it. These words are easy online, he said. They are harder at 6:42 in the morning, behind a locked door, when the person outside looks like someone you have already decided does not belong. Callahan's face flushed, but Marcus did not give him the relief of making this only about him. This is bigger than one comment, bigger than one door. Every unnecessary stop, every dismissive tone, every complaint brushed aside, every citizen treated like an interruption instead of a human being begins with the same failure. The belief that dignity has to be earned before it is given. Dana Brooks lowered her gaze, not from guilt, but from recognition. She had seen residents come into that building nervous, angry, grieving, confused. She had also seen officers decide within seconds who deserved patience and who deserved suspicion. Marcus placed the paper on the podium. His voice softened, and somehow that made it stronger. My father was a bus mechanic in South Carolina. He used to tell me that you can learn a lot about a person by watching how they treat someone they think cannot help them or hurt them. This morning, I learned something about this squad. Now this squad is going to learn something about itself. Outside the windows, the early sunlight crossed the parking lot, touching rows of patrol cars lined up like promises. Inside those promises felt unfinished. Marcus looked toward the locked door, then back at his officers. No one leaves this room until we understand what that door just revealed. Marcus let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable enough to tell the truth. In that room were people who had chased stolen cars through rain, answered domestic disturbance calls at 2 in the morning, held shaking hands after highway crashes, and carried the weight of public service in ways most citizens never saw. He knew that. He respected that. But he also knew courage in the street did not excuse cowardice in the station, and a badge polished on the outside could still hide a failure of character underneath. He stepped away from the podium and walked slowly between the tables, not like a man inspecting suspects, but like a leader trying to understand the people he had inherited. Before anyone speaks, he said, I want every officer here to think about the last person who walked into this building and felt small. No one moved. Maybe it was a teenager reporting a stolen phone. Maybe it was a mother asking why her son had been stopped 3 times in 1 month. Maybe it was an elderly man confused about a parking citation. Maybe it was someone who did not speak confidently, did not dress the way you expected, did not know the right words to use. Ask yourself what they received from you. Patience or performance. Help or humiliation? Officer Tyler Reese stared at his hands. He was only 27, 3 years on the job, still new enough to remember the Academy speeches about honor, but old enough to know how quickly those speeches could fade inside a room where louder men set the tone. He had not locked the door. He had not made the comment. But he had smiled. Just a small smile, the kind people use when they want to survive a room without challenging it. And now that smile felt heavier than words. Across from him, Brent Callahan leaned back again, but this time the movement looked forced. "Commander," he said. "With respect, the squad room has security rules. We cannot just let anyone walk in." Marcus stopped beside the center table. "That is correct." Callahan seemed to regain a little confidence. "So maybe this is being taken out of context." The word context hung in the air like smoke. Marcus turned toward him fully. "Then give me the context for saying this room is for real officers." Callahan opened his mouth, then closed it. The answer was not available because the truth was too ugly to dress up. Sergeant Alan Price cleared his throat. "Sir, I should have stepped in." The admission surprised the room more than Callahan's excuse. Price was 52, with 26 years on the force and the tired eyes of a man who had seen too much and corrected too little. "I heard it," he continued. "I knew it was wrong. I let it pass." Marcus nodded, not warmly, not coldly, but with the seriousness of a man receiving evidence. That is where change begins. Not with speeches. With ownership. Dana Brooks finally spoke from the back. "This is not the first time, Commander." Heads turned. Callahan's eyes narrowed, but she did not look at him. She looked at Marcus. Not the door. The attitude. It shows up in comments. In who gets doubted. In who gets called aggressive for asking a question. In who gets patience and who gets pressure. Her voice did not shake, but the room did. Marcus had not expected the truth to arrive so early, but when it did, he made space for it. "Thank you, Officer Brooks." Then he looked at the others. "This department does not need perfect people. Perfect people do not exist. What it needs are honest people, teachable people, accountable people. And if any officer believes accountability is an attack, then they have misunderstood the badge." The clock above the whiteboard clicked to 7:03 a.m. Roll call should have started 3 minutes ago, but something more important had begun instead. Marcus returned to the podium and opened the folder again. Inside were community complaint summaries, retention reports, body camera audit notes, and survey responses from residents who felt unseen by the very department sworn to protect them. He did not raise the stack for drama. He simply placed it on the table where everyone could see its thickness. "I reviewed the last 18 months before I accepted this position," he said. "This morning did not create my concern. It confirmed it." The officers looked at the folder as if it had weight beyond paper. Marcus placed both hands on the podium. "So here is what happens next. We are going to rebuild the standard from the inside out. Not because the mayor wants headlines. Not because the chief wants a clean report. Because every person who walks through that door deserves to be treated like their dignity is not optional." Callahan looked away first. That was when Marcus knew the locked door had opened more than a room. It had opened the wound underneath it. The folder on the table changed the temperature of the room. It was not dramatic in the way people imagined discipline to be. There were no slammed fists, no shouting, no public shaming disguised as leadership. There was only paper, silence, and the uncomfortable realization that patterns had been written down long before anyone in that room had been forced to name them. Marcus opened the first report and read without looking at Callahan. "March 12th, last year. A resident named Mrs. Gloria Watkins came to this station to report that her grandson had been stopped twice near Lincoln Avenue while walking home from basketball practice. She wrote that she felt dismissed, that the desk officer told her, quote, 'Boys need to learn how to cooperate,' end quote, before anyone reviewed the complaint." Marcus lowered the page. Her grandson was 15. No one spoke. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, filling the silence with a cold mechanical sound. Marcus turned to another page. June 28th. A delivery driver was questioned in the rear parking lot while dropping off food for dispatch. His complaint says 2 officers asked whether the car was actually his. He had the receipt, the order number, and his driver identification. The complaint was closed as a misunderstanding. Tyler Reese shifted in his chair. He remembered that night. He had not said the words, but he had watched the driver stand beside his own car under the yellow security lights, embarrassment tightening his face while officers joked after he left. At the time, Tyler had told himself it was just how the older guys talked. Now that excuse felt like a stain. Marcus continued. September 5th. A college student from Westbridge State came here after his bicycle was stolen. The note attached to his complaint says he was asked 3 times whether he was sure the bike belonged to him. Officer Brooks closed her eyes briefly. She had taken that student's second call, the one where he apologized for bothering them, as if asking for basic service had been too much. That was the part that stayed with her. Not the complaint. The apology. Marcus placed the pages back into the folder. These are not headlines. These are not viral clips. These are ordinary moments. That is what makes them dangerous. Most damage to public trust does not happen all at once. It happens in small decisions that teach people they will not be believed, welcomed, or protected unless they first survive our assumptions. Sergeant Price rubbed a hand over his face. Commander, some of us have been asking for better training for years. Marcus looked at him. Training helps, but training cannot replace courage. Price nodded slowly, accepting the weight of that answer. Marcus looked around the room again, and this time his voice carried something more personal. I know what this uniform can mean at its best. I have seen officers drive through storms to bring insulin to a trapped senior. I have seen an officer sit on a curb for 40 minutes with a homeless veteran because the man was scared and had nowhere to go. I have seen this job done with honor. That is why I will not lower the standard for anyone who treats disrespect like a tradition. Callahan finally spoke, quieter than before. Are you saying we are all racist? The word landed with a visible flinch across several faces, as though naming it made the room more dangerous than living with it. Marcus did not react with anger. He had heard that question in conference rooms, city halls, precinct basements, and academy classrooms. It was often less of a question than a shield. I am saying this, Marcus replied. If your first concern is whether you are being accused instead of whether someone was harmed, you are starting in the wrong place. Callahan looked down. For the first time, he did not have an answer ready. Marcus softened his tone, but not his standard. Accountability is not the enemy of good officers. It is how good officers protect the meaning of the badge from those who misuse it, ignore it, or hide behind it. The words seemed to settle especially hard on Tyler. He lifted his eyes. Commander, he said, voice careful. What should I have done? The question was small, almost childlike, but honest enough to shift the room. Marcus turned toward him. You should have opened the door. And before that, you should have challenged the comment. Not with a speech, not with a scene, just with enough courage to say, that is not how we do things here. Tyler nodded, ashamed but listening. Marcus continued. That sentence can change a room. It can save a career. More importantly, it can protect a person's dignity before damage is done. Outside, the sun rose higher over the parking lot, reflecting off windshields and badge decals. Inside, the officers sat with the uneasy knowledge that the morning had become more than an introduction. It had become a mirror. Marcus closed the folder and rested his hand on top of it. Now we move from what happened to what we do about it. Marcus did not announce punishments first, because punishment alone could make people cautious without making them better. He knew the difference. Fear could teach an officer to hide a problem. Accountability could teach an officer to face one. He looked at the men and women in front of him and saw more than uniforms. He saw habits, excuses, pride, exhaustion, good intentions buried under bad culture, and a few hardened hearts that might resist change until change arrived with paperwork attached. Here is what happens today, he said. Every officer on this shift will complete a written account of what happened before I entered this room. Not a group story, not a version designed in the hallway. Your own account. What you heard, what you said, what you did, and what you failed to do. Callahan's eyes lifted sharply. Marcus saw it, but did not react. Second, the access log from this door will be preserved. Third, the hallway camera will be reviewed. Fourth, internal standards will receive my report before noon. And fifth, this squad will begin a 90-day reset on professional conduct, community contact, and intervention responsibility. The words 90-day reset moved through the room like a cold wind. It sounded official because it was. It sounded serious because it had to be. Tyler Reese raised his hand halfway, then lowered it, uncertain whether grown officers raised hands in moments like this. Marcus nodded toward him. Speak. Tyler swallowed. What does intervention responsibility mean, sir? Marcus stepped closer to the center table. It means you do not get to stand beside misconduct and call yourself uninvolved. If another officer demeans someone, escalates without cause, ignores a citizen's concern, or treats dignity like an inconvenience, you have a duty to intervene. Early, clearly, professionally, not because you dislike the officer, because you respect the oath. He let that settle. A badge does not only give you authority, it gives you responsibility for the conduct that happens in your presence. Sergeant Price looked down at the table, and for the first time that morning, his silence seemed less like defense and more like grief. He remembered a young patrolman he had been 20 years earlier, still idealistic, still willing to speak up. He wondered when he had started choosing peace in the room over principle in the work. The answer did not come as a date. It came as a feeling, and it embarrassed him. Officer Brooks spoke again. "Commander, will this include supervisors?" Marcus turned to her immediately. "It starts with supervisors." Her expression changed, just slightly, as though some private burden had finally been acknowledged. "Rank does not protect anyone from accountability," Marcus continued. "In fact, rank raises the expectation. If a supervisor allows disrespect to become routine, that supervisor is not keeping order. That supervisor is teaching the room what is permitted." Sergeant Price nodded once, slowly. "Understood." Callahan let out a breath through his nose. Not quite a laugh, but close enough to draw Marcus's attention. The room tightened. Marcus looked at him. "Officer Callahan, you seem to have something to add." Callahan sat forward, the last of his confidence trying to dress itself as honesty. "I just think morale is going to take a hit if people feel like one bad joke can ruin their career." Marcus held his gaze. Morale built on disrespect is not morale. It is permission. Callahan's face hardened. Marcus continued, still calm. "And what happened this morning was not simply a joke. It was a decision to exclude someone based on an assumption. When that assumption was challenged, you defended the door instead of examining the bias behind it." The words were clean, precise, and impossible to dodge. Callahan looked away again, but this time there was anger under the shame. Marcus noticed. So did Brooks. So did Tyler. And in that small shift, another truth entered the room. Not everyone resents wrongdoing because it happened. Some resent being seen. Marcus returned to the podium and picked up the department values sheet. "This reset will include scenario training, community listening sessions, review of complaint handling, and peer intervention practice. But none of that will matter if the lesson stays on paper. So we begin now." He pointed gently toward the door. "Imagine being a citizen standing out there. You are nervous. You need help. You hear laughter inside. You wonder whether you will be believed. You wonder whether your name, your neighborhood, your skin, your accent, your clothes, or your past will enter the room before your truth does." The squad room was fully still now. That is the moment we either become what the badge promises, or we become the reason people stop trusting it. Tyler's eyes shone with the discomfort of someone finally understanding the size of a small failure. Brooks sat upright, ready for whatever came next. Price looked older but clearer. Callahan looked cornered. Marcus placed the paper back down. "At 8 o'clock, we will meet with Chief Reynolds. At 9 o'clock, patrol assignments continue. The city still needs us. But from this minute forward, no one in this division gets to confuse tradition with integrity." By 7:58, the squad room no longer looked like a place waiting for a normal shift. The duty board still showed patrol zones, traffic details, school crossing assignments, and 2 pending court appearances, but the officers moved with a careful quietness now, as if every ordinary sound had become part of the record. Pens scratched across paper. Chairs shifted softly. Nobody joked. Nobody leaned back with that lazy confidence that had filled the room less than 90 minutes earlier. Marcus stood near the windows, looking down at the parking lot where the city was waking up beyond the gates. A woman in scrubs crossed the sidewalk toward the bus stop. A sanitation truck groaned along Maple Street. 2 children with backpacks hurried beside their father, one skipping over cracks in the pavement, the other dragging one shoe like the morning was already too heavy. This was the city they served. Not an idea, not a statistic, not a line in a mission statement. Real people moving through real mornings, carrying private burdens officers rarely saw until something went wrong. Marcus thought of his father again, the old bus garage in Columbia, the smell of motor oil and rainwater, the way his father would come home with grease under his nails and still stand tall at the dinner table. "Son, he used to say. Never let a title make you forget the person standing in front of you. Back then, Marcus thought it was just a father teaching manners. Years later, he understood it was a survival rule for any human being handed power. The squad room door opened at exactly 8 o'clock. Chief Elaine Reynolds stepped in, silver hair pulled back, navy blazer crisp, eyes moving once across the room before settling on Marcus. She had led Westbridge Police Department for 4 years, long enough to inherit problems she did not create and become responsible for fixing them anyway. Behind her was Captain Denise Alvarez from Internal Standards, carrying a tablet and a slim folder. The room rose almost at once. Chief Reynolds lifted one hand. "Sit down." The officers sat. The 2 words carried no anger, but they had weight. Marcus met her at the front, and for a brief second, something unspoken passed between them. Not surprise. Confirmation. She already knew why he had requested the early access logs be preserved. She already knew this was not going to be a ceremonial first day. Reynolds faced the room. "Commander Ellison briefed me 15 minutes ago. I have also reviewed the hallway camera and the entry system record." Callahan's face tightened. Tyler stared straight ahead. Sergeant Price folded his hands on the table. Reynolds continued. "This department has spent the last 2 years telling the public we are committed to trust, fairness, and professionalism. Those words mean nothing if they fail inside our own walls before the first call of the day." Captain Alvarez tapped her tablet once. "Internal Standards will conduct preliminary interviews this afternoon. Officer Callahan, Sergeant Price, and Officer Reese, you will remain available after shift briefing. Officer Brooks, you will also be interviewed as a witness." Nobody argued. That alone felt new. Callahan looked as though he wanted to speak, but the presence of 2 commanders and a captain seemed to press the words back into his throat. Chief Reynolds turned slightly toward Marcus. "Commander, this is your division now. Proceed." Marcus stepped forward. The phrase "your division" now moved through the room like a gavel made of air. Not because it gave him power, because it made the power undeniable. The same man they had left outside the door was now standing at the front with the chief's authority behind him and the city's expectations in front of him. "Today," Marcus said, "we begin with clarity. Officer Callahan will be reassigned from field training duties pending review. No officer who models exclusion will be responsible for shaping new officers. Sergeant Price will submit a supervisory accountability statement by end of day. Officer Reese will complete peer intervention coaching and will ride with Officer Brooks for the next 2 weeks." Tyler turned toward Brooks, surprised. She gave him a small nod, not warm, not unkind, simply steady. Marcus continued. "This is not about humiliation. It is about correction. The public does not need officers who never make mistakes. The public needs officers who do not defend mistakes when dignity is on the line." Chief Reynolds watched him with a quiet approval that did not need to become praise. Marcus looked at Callahan last. "And let me be clear. A career is not measured by how loudly a person resists accountability. It is measured by whether they can become more honest after the truth arrives." Callahan's eyes dropped to the table. For the first time, the room did not feel sorry for him. It felt responsible for what came next. By 9 o'clock, the city did what cities always do. It kept moving. Dispatch calls resumed. Keyboards clicked, radios murmured, and the Westbridge Police Department returned to its public rhythm. But something inside the 3rd floor had shifted in a way no schedule could capture. Officer Tyler Reese rode in the passenger seat of Patrol Unit 12 beside Officer Dana Brooks, his body facing forward while his thoughts stayed behind in the squad room. For the first few blocks, neither of them spoke. The cruiser rolled past brick storefronts, a pharmacy opening its metal gate, a diner with steam fogging the front windows, and a bus bench where an older man in a brown coat fed crumbs to pigeons from a paper napkin. Tyler finally broke the silence. "I keep thinking it was just a few seconds," he said. Brooks kept both hands on the wheel. "It usually is." He looked at her. "What do you mean?" She slowed at a yellow light, stopping smoothly even though she could have made it through. "The moment when you decide who you are. It usually does not announce itself. It is a comment, a look, a door, a choice to say something or stay comfortable." Tyler looked out the window. The words did not accuse him, which somehow made them harder to avoid. "I did not think of myself as part of it," he admitted. "I did not say it." Brooks nodded. "That is what I used to tell myself too." He turned back to her, surprised. She kept her eyes on the road. My second year, there was a woman who came in to report that her landlord had been entering her apartment without permission. She was upset, talking fast, waving papers. One of the senior officers called her dramatic after she left. Everybody laughed. I did not. But I did not correct him either. A week later, she came. Back with proof. Emails. Photos. A neighbor's statement. She had been telling the truth the whole time. Tyler was quiet. Brooks continued. That was when I learned that disrespect does not need everybody's voice. It only needs everybody's permission. The cruiser turned onto Lincoln Avenue, where rows of modest houses sat beneath maple trees just beginning to change color. Children's bicycles leaned on porches. A church sign announced a Saturday food pantry. A man washing his car lifted one hand as they passed, not quite waving, not quite refusing to. Tyler noticed the uncertainty in the gesture. For the first time, he wondered how many people saw the cruiser before they saw the people inside it. Back at headquarters, Marcus sat in his new office with the blinds half open and the door deliberately wide. The room still smelled faintly of fresh paint and cardboard. On the desk sat a nameplate someone had placed there before his arrival, Commander Marcus Ellison. He looked at it for a long moment, not with pride exactly, but with responsibility. Titles were heavy when worn correctly. Chief Reynolds stood near the doorway, arms folded. You handled that room better than most would have, she said. Marcus gave a faint smile. I have had practice being underestimated. Reynolds stepped inside. I know. That is part of why you are here. He looked up. She continued. Westbridge has good officers. It also has officers who learn to confuse loyalty with silence. I need you to separate the two. Marcus leaned back, the morning moving through him now that the first wave had passed. Loyalty to people should never outrank loyalty to the oath. Reynolds nodded. That sentence is going to upset some people. Then they probably need to hear it twice. For the first time that day, Reynolds smiled. But it faded quickly. Callahan has influence. Not formal, but cultural. Some officers follow his tone because it is easier than challenging him. Marcus glanced through the open door toward the hallway. Then we changed the tone. Downstairs, Brent Callahan sat alone in interview room B, waiting for internal standards. The room was plain. Gray table, 2 chairs, a wall clock, a box of tissues no one wanted to be seen using. He stared at his own reflection in the dark screen of a mounted monitor. For years, he had mistaken laughter for respect. He had mistaken fear for authority. Now, sitting in a quiet room with no audience, he was beginning to understand how much of his confidence had depended on other people looking away. And that was the strange thing about accountability. It did not always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it arrived as a closed door, a silent room, and the first honest question a man had avoided for years. What kind of officer had he become when he thought nobody important was watching? By early afternoon, the first community complaint file had become more than a document on Marcus Ellison's desk. It had become a name. Mrs. Gloria Watkins, 71 years old, retired cafeteria manager, grandmother to a 15-year-old boy named Jordan who walked the same route home from basketball practice every Tuesday and Thursday, 2.4 miles from Westbridge High School to a small blue house on Lincoln Avenue with wind chimes on the porch. Marcus read her original statement twice, not because it was complicated, but because it was simple in the painful way truth often is. She had not asked for anyone to be fired. She had not asked for money. She had not even used the word racism in the first paragraph. She had written, I just want someone to explain why my grandson is treated like a problem before he opens his mouth. Marcus sat back, the sentence staying with him longer than the rest. Across town, Officer Brooks and Officer Reese pulled into the parking lot of Westbridge High for a scheduled safety check. The school resource officer had requested extra visibility after a string of bicycle thefts. Nothing major, nothing dramatic, just the kind of routine service that could either build trust or quietly damage it. Tyler stepped out of the cruiser and adjusted his vest, scanning the sidewalk as students moved between buildings with backpacks, headphones, and paper lunch bags. A month ago, he might have looked first for who seemed suspicious. Today, after one hard morning, he tried to look first for who seemed young. That difference unsettled him. Near the bike rack, a black teenager in a gray hoodie was kneeling beside a red bicycle, working at the chain with a small tool. Tyler felt the old reflex move through him before he wanted it to. Question. Approach. Control the scene. Brooks noticed the shift in his posture. "What do you see?" she asked. Tyler hesitated. "A kid working on a bike." "What else?" He looked again. The teenager had a school identification card clipped to his backpack. A basketball duffel bag sat beside him with Westbridge High printed on the side. His hands were greasy from the chain, and his face showed concentration, not panic. Tyler exhaled. Maybe his chain slipped. Brooks nodded. "Then start there." They walked over, not fast, not heavy, not with hands resting on equipment like suspicion needed a costume. Tyler stopped a few feet away. "Hey, how are you doing? Need a hand with that chain?" The teenager looked up, cautious at first, then surprised. "Yeah, it keeps jumping off when I switch gears." Brooks knelt slightly, keeping distance, her voice easy. "That happened to my nephew's bike. Mind if Officer Reese takes a look?" The boy nodded. Tyler crouched beside the bike and saw the problem in seconds. The rear derailleur was bent just enough to throw the chain. He explained it plainly. "No lecture, no edge, just help. You can ride it home if you keep it in a lower gear, but you should get it adjusted before practice tomorrow." The boy relaxed. "Thanks." Brooks looked at his backpack tag. "You are Jordan Watkins, right?" The boy froze for half a second, and Tyler saw it clearly. Not guilt, not defiance, but the learned fear of being recognized by police for the wrong reason. Brooks softened her voice. "Your grandmother came by the station a while back. She was worried about you. Commander Ellison read her letter today." Jordan looked between them. "Is she in trouble?" Tyler felt something twist in his chest. A child's first thought was that concern had become danger. Brooks shook her head. "No, she is not in trouble. And neither are you." The words seemed to reach him slowly. Tyler stood, wiping bike grease from his fingers with a napkin from the cruiser. "Actually," he said, "I owe you something." Jordan's eyes narrowed with confusion. Tyler swallowed, choosing each word carefully. "I owe you and your grandmother better than assumptions. I was not one of the officers who stopped you, but I have been part of rooms where people talk like that kind of thing was no big deal. It is a big deal." Jordan did not smile. He did not forgive him with some easy gesture that would make the moment comfortable. He just listened, and that was enough. Back at headquarters, Marcus received a message from Brooks. "We met Jordan Watkins. Helped with his bike." Reese spoke honestly. "No incident." Marcus read it once, then again. He looked through his open office door, toward the hallway where officers passed in both directions, some avoiding his gaze, some meeting it with new seriousness. Change did not arrive all at once. It arrived in inches, in a different question, in a slower approach, in one officer choosing help before suspicion. Marcus placed Mrs. Watkins's letter in a new folder labeled Follow-up Required. Then he wrote beneath it in black ink, "Dignity is not a program. It is a practice." The message from Officer Brooks stayed on Marcus Ellison's screen longer than any disciplinary notice could have. It was only a few lines, ordinary enough to be overlooked by someone searching for dramatic proof of change, but Marcus knew better. Real change rarely begins with applause. It begins when a person who once moved on instinct pauses long enough to see the human being in front of them. He closed the message and stood from his desk as the afternoon light stretched across the third-floor hallway, turning the polished floor into a pale ribbon of gold. The station sounded different now, or maybe he was listening differently. A dispatcher laughed softly into her headset after calming a confused caller. A records clerk explained a form to an older man with patient repetition. Somewhere near the stairwell, Tyler Reese's voice carried low and careful as he told Officer Brooks he wanted to follow up with Jordan's grandmother before the week was over. Marcus did not smile right away. Hope, in a police department, had to be handled carefully. It could not be a slogan. It had to survive paperwork, pressure, old habits, and the quiet resentment of people who preferred the old room because the old room had protected them. At 3:15, Captain Alvarez returned with the preliminary interview notes. Chief Reynolds joined them in Marcus's office, closing the door halfway, but not all the way, because Marcus had already made it clear that his command would not be built behind sealed walls unless privacy required it. Alvarez placed the folder on his desk. "The hallway camera confirms the timing. The access reader confirms your entry." Reese admitted he failed to intervene. Price admitted he heard the comment and allowed it. Brooks corroborated the pattern without exaggeration. Marcus looked at the final page. "And Callahan?" Alvarez's expression did not change, but her pause said enough. "He acknowledges the words. He denies bias. He says it was locker room humor." Chief Reynolds sighed, not loudly, but with the exhaustion of a leader hearing an old excuse wearing a fresh uniform. Marcus read the statement once. The language was polished in all the wrong places. Misunderstood. Taken out of context. No intent to offend. Respect for all coworkers. It was the familiar architecture of avoidance. A house built without a door to remorse. Marcus set the page down. Then the consequence needs to teach what the apology refused to learn. By 4 o'clock, Brent Callahan was formally removed from field training duties pending the full review, assigned to administrative work away from public contact, and required to complete a corrective conduct plan before any return to patrol consideration. It was not revenge. It was not spectacle. It was the system finally doing what it often promised and too rarely practiced, protecting the standard before more damage could be done. Sergeant Price accepted a supervisory review and requested to attend the first intervention training session, not as punishment, but as proof that late accountability was still better than none. Tyler Reese sent his written statement with one sentence at the end that Marcus read twice. I thought silence kept me neutral, but it made me useful. To the wrong thing. That sentence mattered. Not because it fixed everything. Because it told the truth. Near sunset, Marcus walked back to the squad room. The same frosted glass door stood where it had that morning, the same gold letters catching the light. But this time, the door was open. Inside, officers prepared for evening shift. Brooks was updating the duty board. Reese was restocking community resource cards near the front desk. Price was speaking quietly with a younger officer, not commanding him, teaching him. Callahan's chair was empty. Marcus stood at the threshold for one quiet second, remembering the sound of the lock, the laughter, the assumption that had tried to hold him outside a room he had been chosen to lead. Then Brooks looked over. Commander, we are ready for evening briefing. Marcus stepped in. No drama. No victory lap. Just a man entering the room with the authority he had never needed them to grant him. Good, he said. Let us begin with what we owe the next person who walks through our door. And in that moment, the badge became what it was always supposed to be, not a wall between power and people, but a promise that power would kneel before dignity. He did not break the door down. He opened it. And once truth walked in, nobody could lock it out again.